Blair Imani, welcome to the show. I'm so excited to finally have you here at Mind Amendment, and really excited to just dive into all of this.
Thank you so much, Patrick Custer. I'm so happy to be here.
It's going to be so great. I'm just going to start off. Question number one. What are some of the earliest messages you were taught about who you were supposed to be from family, faith, school, or society?
You know, it's so interesting because I grew up in the late 90s, early 2000s, girl power era. We had Spice Girls, we had Barbie. I remember just on loop in my head, be who you wanna be, B-A-R-B-I, that was Barbie girl, just stuck in my head. And I think that was a really great time. But at the same time, it was a time when, there was the perfect body size and it was way too thin and people were getting shamed for being a size 6 on tabloid magazines and stuff like that. So I think that was a huge part of it. But then I have my parents who both, I think, identify as oddballs or didn't really fit in. And they were so happy when they found each other because they could just go be their fun, fantastic selves all over the world. And when I was growing up, there was this constant message of you might not fit in, but that's okay because it's going to benefit you in the long run. Whether it's if you're a nerd now, you're going to be successful later, or my mom being so obsessed with People magazine and True Hollywood Stories. And whenever she would find that some celebrity was bullied growing up, she'd be like, Blair, come in here, learn about how Eminem was bullied, or whoever.
Yeah.
And I feel like I didn't really identify as somebody who was bullied at that time, but I was definitely left out often. Mm-hmm. And my parents were constantly reminding me that it's okay to be different. Let's get involved with hobbies. Let's get involved with activities. Let's learn how to be our own best friends by ourselves. And so I feel like the message that I got externally, which were a lot, sometimes from faith spaces. I grew up Baptist. Sometimes were from the faith spaces where it was you should fit in, you should try to conform, you should try to have as many friends as possible. And I feel like TV and media weren't necessarily embracing the weirdos.
No.
But I mean, that was kind of the thing about the early 2000s, be who you want to be, but do it this way.
Yeah.
And my parents...
Urkel.
Exactly.
We all made fun of Urkel.
100%.
Today, that show would have never flied the way that it was,
But if you think about the genius of it, and I feel like this is what my parents would try to tell me about, is Jaleel White was so creative for coming up with that character. He became super successful. They rewrote the entire show to be around him. So yes, he was getting made fun of for being the weirdo and the oddball, but he was the weirdo and the oddball that was successful. And I think that was kind of the energy I was constantly getting.
So that leads me to ask, how did those themes show up in your mental and emotional health? What you're talking about, mom and dad instilled in you this resilience, but what I hear you saying is there were still these messages that resonated inside your mind at the time. What did you do with that, and how did it manifest for you?
So I was definitely one of those slightly concerning emo kids, and I'll really paint a picture. It was so funny though, because I worshipped at the altar of Lady Gaga, and I really think that Lady Gaga does not get her flowers enough for how much she helped weird kids and outcasts feel at home in their heart,
Preach.
Born This Way, even before that, we were little monsters, and that's sometimes how we felt in our own minds. And I think before that, I didn't always have the most healthy outlets for how I, expressed myself. I really struggled with self-harm for a while. I would kind of spiral. I can look at it as spiraling now, but when I was a kid, I was just well, I'm already sad and angsty and feeling like I don't belong in the world. I'll just turn on Linkin Park and reinforce those ideas, which I know can be cathartic for some people, but for me, it took me to a dark place. And so the first time I was actually institutionalized for mental health was when I was in middle school. And that had to do with me really feeling depressed and not safe in my own mind and being able to have those resources. But I also have parents who work in social work and work in mental health. Mm-hmm. My dad's worked in mental health his entire adult life and continues to. And having him really, I remember my dad drove me to the facility and we did the intake and everything, which was really tough. But it was what I needed in that moment. And I talk about it so matter-of-factly now, but it's part of my story and it's part of how I felt like I could stick around. But I think that was before I discovered Lady Gaga and this kind of internet culture and being able to go on forums and talk to people who are also feeling nobody at my school likes me and I think I'm pretty cool, what's happening. And so I think being one of those slightly concerning emo kids, it meant that I was sometimes I didn't know how I needed attention, and I needed positive attention, and I needed closeness from friends, and I wasn't getting that. And so what that turned into for me was being the kid who kind of acted out and maybe wrote like some really disturbing poetry in hopes that the teacher would like notice, not because I was like, it was more so I could have validation or just somebody to like notice me a little bit, because like, I remember recently I was sitting somewhere and it was like a cafeteria style setting and I didn't have anyone to sit with. And my heart and my mind went straight back to middle school and feeling like, I have no one to sit with. And so like, those are some wounds that I definitely still have to work on healing. But it also, I was in so many art classes, and God bless the art teachers. And there's so much support we need for the arts for young people, because, you know, for me, it was going to ceramics class, it was going to painting class and learning how to do watercolors and oil paints and sculpting and bookmaking. And I did everything: bead making, glass blowing, book binding. I did anything I could do with my hands and with people who, you know, maybe this is their creative outlet. I also did like stagecraft, where I learned how to make sets. All of that were really healthy outlets for me to kind of deal with those feelings of loneliness, while also being medicated fairly young for anxiety and going through, you know, ADHD. It's so interesting now, the conversations of ADHD, because so many people are getting diagnosed in adulthood. But I remember being that hyperactive kid, the weird kid who has to go to the, you know, school nurse to take her booster Ritalin. And now I have friends who are like asking me about, well, how do I navigate my ADHD in adulthood? And so it feels like I went through a lot of things that people are going through now, and I'm grateful for, I think, every aspect of it, because it's made my life richer and it's helped me show up for people who might feel like they're alone.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Absolutely. So was there a particular moment when you realized that your survival required a new narrative?
Absolutely. I think that the narratives that I was constantly being told was like, you know, you crash out, like you don't have friends, like you're kind of doomed to a life of loneliness. And there were so many people who had, I think, tried to help me rewrite that story, but a lot of things didn't resonate. Like, I remember before I went to college, my mom enrolled me in this like how to make friends class. And honestly, it was a little humiliating, because it was like, oh my gosh, is it that far gone? And I'm not friends with any of the people who are involved in that class, because I don't think that for us, it was that we didn't know how to make friends, because I think that's the narrative, right? Like, if you don't have a lot of friends, then you must not be very good at being a friend, or you must not be very interesting, or you must actually be so weird that no one wants to hang out with you. And that makes no sense, because there are so many people in the world, and thank goodness for the internet. I mean, there's a lot of problems with the internet, but the beautiful thing is that sometimes the people who are outcasts can find each other. And so I had to reject a lot of it. Like, you know, I want to listen to heavy metal, and I want to listen to rap music, and I want to be emo, and I also want to have twists, and I also want to do this, and I want to be that. And I went where I remember I had this debate teacher who he just said to me like one day, he was like, I can't figure you out. And I was like, okay, like that sounds like a personal problem. You know, thank goodness I had a sassy mom who told me it was okay to be sassy to adults. But that was because one day I had dressed up like in this like skull and crossbones like skeleton style shirt that like I could put my thumbs through. It's like from Hot Topic. I felt so cool and edgy. And then the next day I dressed like a rainbow. And I learned the word duplicitous that day, because the teacher said that my you know, how I portray myself as really duplicitous. And I'm like, maybe it's just really complex, you know, and it's okay if you can't figure me out. Like, I'm one of your many students. You don't have to figure everybody out. I just kind of went about my day. And so I think I felt like I had to constantly reject how other people were trying to understand me. And I think that's so important, because oftentimes how we understand ourselves can be the most important thing. In a world where we're constantly being invalidated or told that we don't belong, or sometimes policies are getting passed that prevent us from living our full truth and our full lives, you have to feel like at least at home in your own self. And if you don't feel at home in yourself, at least try to, you know, respect yourself, is what I try to encourage people to do. But it's a hard journey. So on that note, can you share an example of a belief that felt like protection but later became a cage? I think the belief that I didn't need friends became a cage eventually, because, you know, I've never been a bridesmaid in someone's wedding. And I think it took me a little while to realize how important it is for me to experience some of those like life milestones, instead of just like, oh, it's fine. Everything's fine. I don't need that. I don't need this. Like, it doesn't bother me that nobody invited me to the birthday party. It doesn't bother me that this, you know, but it's really bothering me. And I think that I was trying to silver lining myself in, like, you know, out of feeling these ways. I was gaslighting myself, or I was, you know, looking on the bright side of things so far that I wasn't able to sit with the sadness. And so what that would end up looking like is me feeling like
Wait, you were denying yourself core emotions?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's something that it sneaks up on you. You don't set out to do that type of thing, but you know, you can't just be happy all the time, especially when it comes to trauma and hurt. You really have to sit with it. And if you don't, it can turn into destructive behavior. And I think that's what happened for me, was looking at, okay, this is the first time I'm around a lot of people, especially after I had come out. And I was in a lot of those spaces, you know, in a lot of our community spaces in the LGBTQ plus community end up being sponsored by alcohol brands. And, you know, there ends up being kind of like this culture of substance. And I felt like, okay, for me to be cool and for me to be fun, then I also need to be drunk, or I need to be this, or I need to be that, or I need to be out of my own mind. And so I think that became a cage. And it took me, I think, really until after the pandemic, or in the midst of the pandemic, for me to have friends and to trust that those people like me because of who I am and not because of what I offer. And that I don't have to like constantly be the one cracking jokes, and I don't have to constantly be, you know, entertaining other people for them to like me, because I needed a reason. Like, why does this person want to be around me if I'm just hanging out with them? And my friend Novi Brown, I remember we were out, we went camping up in Lake Isabella in LA, or, you know, outside of Bakersfield. And I was sitting there and she's chilling. Everybody should be chilling in the RV, you know, we're camping. And I was talking about something and she's like, Blair, you can also just like sit there and we could just like sit together. And I was like, it rewired my brain, because I was like, I don't have to do anything for this person to like me. We can just be friends. And that was really core. That was really needed for healing. And I think it also speaks to how so much of our healing is personal, but sometimes our healing has to be collective and it has to happen with other people.
Oh, yeah. And it continues. I mean, I love that you're talking about how, because this is in adulthood just a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
Right. And you've already done so much healing at this point. And a theme that you've, you know, at that time, I would wage to bet, or what is that saying? Whatever, you know what I mean? That you would have identified and said, yeah, I think I've walked through the healing of that process.
That's the biggest, like, you know, it's kind of, you're getting bamboozled if you ever feel like your healing's done. But I feel like that's with anything in life. Like, if you feel like, oh, I'm done doing all the good deeds, or I'm done doing all the healing, or I'm done doing all the learning, you're not really living, because living involves healing and constantly learning and constantly growing.
Stagnancy is death. I mean, it's death, like spiritually, emotionally, in so many ways. Gosh, yeah, I want to ask this next question, but I have to say, you really like struck a chord with me when you were talking about how in the LGBTQ plus spaces, there's so much sponsored by alcohol and or party scene or this or that. And I think that people like you and me and other people who are different, being able to inspire and incite different ways of being and having fun that aren't necessarily that culture that has been a survival culture for LGBTQ plus communities in decades past. That's, I mean, truly what that is.
It's survival, but I also think I could get on my soapbox and talk about how predatory it is for the alcohol industry.
Oh,
because they know exactly what they're doing. Like, you're going to take people who have higher incidence of depression and anxiety because of how outcast we are. I think sometimes when you talk about communities that have higher rates of mental health conditions, people think it's inherent to that community. It's more so a reflection of how society has put that community into a box. And so survival becomes having these spaces. But then when it becomes exclusive, like I remember when I came out and I started getting invited to all these galas and all these fundraisers, there would be just so much ubiquitous alcohol. And I think there are things that are happening now, which is so positive. Just having a mocktail option available.
Yes.
Putting, you know, I think open bars, some people love those, but I remember at a certain point, especially when I lived in New York, I would go to events just because it was an open bar. You know, I would like do the carpet, open bar, go home. And I remember I would also order gin and tonics because nobody knew it was alcohol. And then being Muslim, there was this extra layer of like, okay, I'm already a quote unquote bad Muslim because I'm bisexual and I'm out, but now I'm also drinking. And then I also felt like I couldn't really sit with my problem with drinking because I shouldn't be drinking anyway. I'm Muslim. That was kind of the narrative. And so it was really kind of this big jumble. And I think I really couldn't get better until I moved out of New York. And my husband and I, when we talk about our time in New York together, because we've been together for 10 years now, we really kind of reflected. He said, I think recently that like, you know, being in New York was really killing me. And I had such highs in my career during that point, but it's true because I was so caught up in being something, I don't know if it was being something I wasn't, but trying to be the version of myself that I thought people would like most. And that people pleasingness and the availability of alcohol and the culture around it, you know, well, I'm not going to get a DUI, I'm taking the subway, like that type of thing. Like it became such a perpetuating cycle, and I had to just get out. And I think sometimes a change of space and a change of pace is really necessary for healing.
Sure. Especially for people who, depending on, for someone like me, change it, just the geography wouldn't have been enough alone. But for many people that, that's the one thing that leads them to the next place of just uncovering what you've talked about in the next phase of just identifying what you need in growth and experiencing your next phase of evolution as a human being.
This podcast is brought to you by Promises Behavioral Health. If you or a loved one are struggling with trauma, addiction, or mental health, we are ready to answer your questions and help you take that next step. Call our admission center at 888-648-4098 or visit us online at www.promises.com. Our team is ready and waiting to answer the call for help.
You just brought this up, and I want to touch on it a little bit more. You're Black, queer, Muslim, neurodivergent. How do these intersecting identities influence the way that you experience emotional regulation?
Ooh. I'm really glad. I don't think anyone's ever asked me that before. And I think it's a really enlightened question because there are certain aspects of who we are as people that influence our experiences. This is what Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw talks about when she talks about intersectionality theory. We have our identities and they connect to different systems in the world, whether that's being a woman and experiencing sexism or, being LGBT and experiencing hate. And sometimes, I don't think I realized this, but I think a big part of it was like living in New York as a visible Muslim woman, during the administration change after 2016, I was constantly on edge. I constantly felt like I was being looked at because I was in many cases. Sometimes the hilarious thing was that it was by allies who had those, silver safety pins. And I would have people who would kind of like hover over me on the subway and like point to their safety pin so I knew that they were safe. But it just kind of made me feel more like I had spotlight on me. And, being a Black woman, I feel like there was a really hard time that I had with trying to be okay with being angry and showing anger. I still struggle with it today because you don't want to be a stereotype. And I think it's something that a lot of people experience regardless of your identity. Like, white men experience this, like, I don't want to be perceived as a racist. I don't want to be perceived negatively either. And that can all influence how we show up in the world. And it can just kind of like close in on who we are, which can be really harmful. I've had so many conversations about like how mental health works, but I don't think I've ever really been able to talk about it as it connects to my identity. So I really thank you for asking that. And I think, I did touch on it when it came to the alcohol issue. Like when I kind of made the move towards reimagining my relationship with alcohol, which happened during the pandemic, there were so many people I had who I kind of had to stop being friends with because they were so toxic about like, well, you shouldn't have been drinking anyway, which isn't a helpful thing to say to somebody who's going through recovery, because it just creates guilt, and I think that it's interesting for me as somebody who converted to Islam, because that's a religion that I chose. I grew up Baptist, and it kind of felt like I was letting I set myself to this super high standard of what it meant to be a Muslim. And I felt like I was failing constantly because, I'm not going to stop being queer because I can be queer and Muslim. And I also at a certain point felt like, well, I'm going to stop drinking because I can drink and be Muslim. And I did drink and I was Muslim, but it wasn't healthy for me.
Well, it's in Christianity, we don't have any of those issues.
Grass is always greener. I think that was another part of it too, was like,
I'm glad you caught that was a joke. Right
100%.
on. Yeah.
I think that when I converted to Islam, I expected all the issues that I had around Christianity and faith and guilt and God to like be left at the doorstep of the church when I went to the mosque. Turns out it's not how it is, because, I think if you're a person of faith or you're spiritual, whether you were born into a religious, kind of context, or you choose one by converting or transitioning to that, kind of culture and community, you adopt certain things and you find that certain things really resonate with you, or you leave them behind. And even things like modesty. I remember when I first converted to Islam, I got rid of all of I called them my hoe clothes, which is so problematic. But anything that was like, I actually kept some of them because I was like, this was expensive. And not because I ever, I didn't really think I would wear them again, but like, I remember there was this, big thing. And there was recently a young woman, I think she might also work with OnlyFans, and she converted to Islam, and she went through that same kind of period of like wanting to get rid of your old you so you can step into your new you. And people were sending this to me being like, can you see this girl? That's so ridiculous. And I was like, that was literally me in 2015. That was 100% me. And I think it happens in any moment of your life where you feel like you need to step into a new space. And sometimes it can be healthy. Like, I know folks who start their sobriety journey and they're like, I don't even want to see a bar. I don't want to see don't drink in front of me. And that's, what they need for them in that moment. And so I kind of had to take a step back and go, okay, how can I still be myself and still step into this new understanding of who I am as a Muslim woman? And I don't think I recognized how much that impacts your mental health, because I realized later on that a lot of it was me revolving myself around what other Muslims thought of me, and things that like, there's varying levels of conservativeness in any religion, but in Islam as well. And it also, interestingly, can correlate to where they are geographically. So, you might have more liberal folks in New York versus in Louisiana, where I converted. And I like my nails done. And there was this one woman at the mosque who saw my nails. And some people will perceive, if you get nail polish, for it to break wudu. That's like the ritual washing that we do before we pray. And I didn't come across that in the Quran. They don't really talk about acrylic nails in the Quran, but there's different interpretations. No tea, no shade. Yeah. And I remember like she was, she had her baby there, and I was getting ready to hold her baby, and she would like snatch the baby away from me. Like, don't touch my baby. You're not clean. And I was like, this is new. And that's when I kind of realized, oh, okay. So all the same stuff that I had dealt with kind of like the pomp and circumstance and pretentiousness around Christianity, it also exists elsewhere too. So I think that, and then add the fact that I kind of went through all of this very publicly online, it just added this whole layer of like, who am I outside of how people see me? Yeah. And I think it was like, I can't remember what year it was, but I had said something like, I've decided to stop trying to be pleasing to Muslims and trying to be pleasing to Allah. And once I did that, my life got a lot simpler, because I have to focus on my personal relationship with God and not what somebody else thinks my nails should look like, or my hair should look like, or how covered my arms and ankles are. Yeah. I just have to be myself.
That's so good. I love where you ended up with that. And thank you for giving those examples of kind of like the progression, because that helped me follow along and maybe put a little bit of my foot in your shoe. Yeah. As you were explaining that, I'm thinking about how, some of those things that we described are things you were born with. And then obviously, with Islam, you chose to convert. And I think that there are things that we come along and finally accept about ourselves that we realize are true, but have always been true. And then sometimes there are things that involve healing and choosing something that's better for ourselves, like you did in 2016 with your faith. No matter what it is in these areas of mental health, sexual expression or identity, gender, spirituality, I know I have experienced a couple of different iterations of massive change of my own. One being after I started to have a public platform. So I've experienced it on both sides. And one thing I want to ask you about is because both on this show where we talk about our mind, right? Like the if we were to compare our mind to a constitution that we develop, and it's like our hardwiring of how we're set up, and unless we amend it as adults, like we keep going back to the same way of making decisions, the same way of viewing things, the same way of responding to things, all. We want to break some of that or help people do that on the show. And we haven't even talked about this yet, but you are the founder of something that I love online that has changed so many people's lives called Smarter in Seconds, where you educate people in such a soundbite. What literally I believe our world is changed by now are soundbites.
It's true.
And so if you were to tell somebody, and I'm going to get more into, and we will, talking about how you're changing people's lives through this work. But as we wrap this first part up of our 3-part series with you, I just want to ask in your closing if you could speak to just how you would encourage someone approaching either on a public platform or not. If you have any words of advice about how to approach the change, whether it's people that are, because like you were talking about the Islam piece, and being concerned with people in the faith. But I know that you also had friends that weren't converted and whatnot. So if you had to comment on the do's and don'ts, the suggestion of what do you do, what do you leave behind, whether it's faith or any of the things that I just talked about, is there a simplicity that you could say boils down to this, let all the rest fall away?
I think a huge part of it is not letting fear dictate your decisions. And that's hard to do because sometimes we want to protect ourselves. And as somebody with anxiety, that's a hard direction and instruction to give. But when we do solely based on fear, and what I mean by that is, what if they don't like me? What if I don't fit in? What if I'm not perfect? What if I don't measure up? We have to let that go because there will be situations where somebody doesn't like your decision. There will be situations where you lose friends because you're changing your lifestyle and it might be better for you. But ultimately, we can't let that fear stop us from becoming the person that we feel we need to be in that moment. And to remember to be yourself throughout it. I believe that who we are is core. I kind of use the flower model of identity. You have the middle part of the flower, right? That's where everything to make the flower grow happens. But then the petals are those amendments. That's who we are. And those petals can wilt away or they can bloom anew at any given moment. But as you have new petals join or you let some petals go, remember not to lose yourself within that.
I love that metaphor because what I was just about to my follow-up question to close this out was going to be that underlying fear is I can't imagine what life will look like if insert anything because of the fear, right? Fear of the unknown on the other side. If all I can picture is the flower with all the petals, but you're telling me some might fall off, how do I know more are going to come? And will it look the same? And will it, you know what I mean?
I think that's, as I've worked through my mental health and feeling enthusiastic about being live, the promise that there will always be more, and that more might not always be fantastic, but there will always be more. And isn't it worthwhile to stick around and figure out what that looks like? Because life will continue to happen. And that promise, I'm not going to tell you it's always going to be great. It's not always going to be sunny. There's going to be gray, rainy, thunderstorm days, but it will continue.
Yes.
And I think having one thing to look forward to into the future is what helps me be enthusiastic about that part.
Yes, I love that. Always picking one thing. Just find one thing.
Just one thing. Yes. Even if it's a concert, even if it's, hang out with a friend, a new hairstyle, a tattoo, whatever it is, just have something that you can hold on to and look forward to, because that's what I think life is about.
So beautiful. I love, this is such a great place to wrap this specific episode, part 1 with the one and only Blair Imani. I'm so honored that you're here. And audience, I hope that you stick around with us. Come back next week. This is part 1 of 3. It's going to be an amazing month. And my challenge to you all is to pick one thing that you're going to be excited about between now and next week when Blair's second episode airs.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Blair.
Thank you.
This podcast is brought to you by Promises Behavioral Health. If you or a loved one are struggling with trauma, addiction, or mental health, we are ready to answer your questions and help you take that next step. Call our admission center at 888-648-4098 or visit us online at www.promises.com. Our team is ready and waiting to answer the call for help.